This graph here tells us a lot about the Saudi Arabian economy. It's a Hubbert curve which predicts the production of a finite resource over time. In this case, it's oil. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil producer, extracting over 12 million barrels a day. But according to this, that will start to slow down in 3 years and could all be gone in 80 years. Which has led to news stories like this. June 6, 2023, a merger is announced between Saudi-backed Live Golf and the PGA Tour, taking ownership of one of the most prestigious sports in the world. The summer also saw headlines in another sport, football. Well over $1 billion has been spent on building the Saudi Pro League, which has attracted some of the biggest global superstars through large transfer fees and salaries. Construction has also undergone on some of the most ambitious design projects the world has seen, set to cost an initial $500 billion. These may seem like random investments, but they are all connected and are part of a carefully crafted plan to lead the Gulf state into the future. Before all of this, Saudi Arabia was famous for one thing: oil. The country quite literally has tons of it, accounting for 17.2% of the world's oil reserves. It's the world's second largest store, falling short only to Venezuela, and it has well over 7 times the amount of the richest economy, the United States. Whilst the price of oil has fluctuated from $17 to $115 in the last 3 years, it's still the most heavily traded commodity in the world, and Saudi Arabia has been one of the biggest exporters of crude oil for the last 30 years. This has allowed it to amass a large trade surplus and has been the main driver of its economic growth, making up 46% of its GDP. It's also the reason that its GDP is so much larger than its neighbors, and why it can turn a city from this to this in just 20 years. Oil has given Saudi Arabia a tremendous amount of power, but this isn't a video about Saudi Arabia's oil reserves. In fact, it's a video about how they're moving away from their petrostate economy. All thanks to this guy here. This is Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS. He's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He's risen to power through the last 10 years, and since 2017 he's been the driving force behind their investment strategy, making him the 8th most powerful man in the world according to Forbes. The strategy in question is something called Vision 2030. Vision 2030 was announced toward the end of 2016 as a plan for a new Saudi Arabia, and it is a strategy by the Saudi government to diversify its economy away from oil, as well as improve its transport and infrastructure links, all whilst bringing about social and cultural reforms to improve Saudi's image on the world stage, moving away from its reputation as a dictatorship. Currently, the Saudi Arabian economy is dominated by its petroleum industry, making up over half of its generated revenue. Much of this is done by Aramco. It's one of the largest petroleum companies in the world and has been state-run since 1980. As oil prices have increased, it's been able to increase profits and generated $161 billion in 2022 alone. But as we know, oil is finite. Based on current demand and forecasting, oil supplies are expected to last for another 50 years, maybe more. The Saudis still have a long time to cash in on their reserves, but Vision 2030 is a longer-term strategy which looks to cement Saudi's status as a global economy long after its wells dry up. So Saudi Arabia is taking some of the revenue that they generate from petroleum-based activities, putting it into something called a sovereign wealth fund, a state-run fund which is used to invest and grow a country's wealth. Saudi Arabia is by no means the first country to try this. Lots of countries have these and have been employing a similar strategy for some time now. Norway has used their sovereign wealth fund to amass a wealth of well over $1 trillion, which has been used to vastly improve the living standards of its citizens. The Saudis' version of this, the PIF, or the Public Investment Fund, is very similar and has major holdings in companies like Uber and Lucid. Together, the fund has over $600 billion of assets under management. Sports has been a focus of their investment strategy as they have extended their global influence by making a series of investments into various sports teams. This has been happening for a while, but it perhaps first brought global attention when the PIF were the majority shareholders in the buyout of Premier League football club Newcastle United for a combined $415 million, seeing them expand into the most popular and heavily televised sports league in the world. Lots of money has also been spent in an attempt to grow a football league of its own, the Saudi Pro League. With the aim of challenging the status quo in Europe, there has been huge investment in the last 2 years. 4 of the clubs are under majority public ownership, and since then, well over $1 billion has been invested into the league, spending on infrastructure to create and improve the existing stadiums, but also famously spending over the odds to bring in some of the biggest names in football. Cristiano Ronaldo and Neymar have both joined this year, along with a whole host of European superstars, with some of the highest earners on contracts of over $100 million per year. This is with the eventual aim of challenging the elite European clubs in the prestigious UEFA Champions League. Football is the world's most popular sport, and with leagues like the English Premier League generating $5 billion per year, it's an attractive, albeit very challenging business to break into. The deal that shocked the most people was, of course, the Saudi-backed merger between Live Golf and the PGA Tour. This was a huge disruption, as golf is an old and prestigious sport, and not one people tend to associate with a desert nation like Saudi Arabia. Back in 2019, the Saudis set up their own golf tour, Live Golf, designed with the aim of providing competition to the long-running PGA Tour. Its strategy was fairly simple: use lots and lots of money to attract some of the biggest stars and slowly take power away from its rivals. It started to work as it attracted huge names in the sport like Phil Mickelson and Dustin Johnson, both accepting large payouts to join the breakaway tour. Despite this, the league was deemed to fail by many of the sports insiders. That was until this year when money appeared to have won, and a merger deal between PGA and Live Golf was announced, paving a new way for golf and Saudi Arabia as they extend their influence into one of the West's oldest sports. Investing in sports isn't necessarily the most profitable investment, with many teams globally being run at a loss by their owners, who view it more as a hobby than a business. But some larger teams, especially in famous leagues, do make money. These recent moves, more importantly, allow Saudi Arabia to gain soft power and extend their influence into many other areas. This has, of course, created criticism. Despite this, it seems to be an effective strategy. By putting their name behind large sports teams and bringing in big-name signings, they are slowly putting themselves on the map as a destination where people will want to travel to. A strategy which so far has been effective. Whilst tourism fell drastically after COVID, it's grown rapidly since then. In the first 3 months of 2023, 7.8 million tourists visited the country compared to 2.5 million in the same period the previous year, a trend which looks to keep growing. Tourism is another key goal of Vision 2030, and the Saudis see this as another way in which they can continue to generate revenue whilst reducing their dependency on oil. To help with this, they've invested heavily in transport and infrastructure, with aims of becoming a global transport hub. Its advantageous position puts it in the center of Africa, Europe, and Asia. However, the infrastructure project which has caught the imagination of the globe is, of course, the NEOM megacity. It's a new urban area planned by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be built in its northwestern Tabuk province. It's an incredibly ambitious project, which will cost well over the budgeted $500 billion. It features NEOM Bay, a new state-of-the-art airport and perhaps the most ambitious construction project ever, the Line. This is the space-age city that will be 170 kilometers long and just 200 meters wide, all whilst being in the middle of the desert. If building a city completely from scratch in 20 years wasn't ambitious enough, then how about a high-speed rail network within the city which aims to make the 170-kilometer journey in under 20 minutes? This is needed as the city will feature no cars, an approach which looks to reduce carbon emissions. The city will be powered entirely by renewable energy, as Saudi Arabia also expands its investment in renewables resources. As part of its move away from oil, Saudi Arabia has invested heavily into renewables. They plan to invest $270 billion in low-carbon energy projects by 2030. Its opportune location to harvest the power of the sun has meant solar energy capacity has expanded over 18-fold between 2016 and 2021, with the aim of supplying half of its electricity needs through solar by 2030. Saudi Arabia has taken on an incredibly ambitious amount of projects in a relatively short time frame. A phrase which is used a lot is that Saudi Arabia aims to do this by 2030 inches or plans to do this by 2040. Whilst it's good to be ambitious, many of their large infrastructure projects are behind schedule and over budget. But due to these projects being state operating, it's hard to get official figures. Whilst Saudi Arabia is one of the richest countries in the world, there is the growing feeling that they may have bitten off more than they can chew. This rapid expansion and spending spree will also have ramifications in geopolitics. Adding to the growing theme in the last 20 years is of both soft and hard power moving away from the US and Europe toward growing superpowers like India, China, and now Saudi Arabia. The moves being made by Saudi Arabia will make it more economically competitive and also attract foreign investment, similar to what has happened with Dubai in recent decades. Whether its aims to improve its public image will work is yet to be seen, as many pundits see the move as superficial with no material change. It also marks a big change as one of the largest oil superpowers looks to transition away from fossil fuels to renewables, hopefully paving the way for really creating a world without oil. One that is for sure, as that the Saudi expansion is not slowing down, and whether it's sports, media or infrastructure, there's plenty more to come from the Gulf state.